welcome to Daily Debrief brought to you by People's Dispatch. I'm Pragya. Across the world, Amazon's warehouse workers went on a Make Amazon Pay strike on Black Friday, the biggest bargain day of the year. We then look at the decision of an Israeli court which has handed out 4 more months of solitary confinement in prison for 20-year-old Ahmed Manasra. The decision has heightened the clamor for his release. And truckers in South Korea are on strike over minimum wage and other demands. Stay on for these stories today on Daily Debrief. Amazon workers across its warehouses in most of Europe, North America, Asia and elsewhere went on strike on Black Friday. They want to dent the behemoth known for overworking, understaffing and offering workers poor wages. Workers are also tired of their productivity being tracked by machines. And unions are encouraging workers to demand higher pay rates, even as the e-retail giant plans to lose 10,000 workers. We go to Anish from People's Dispatch, who has been tracking the story. So, Anish, workers seem pretty angry at Amazon, and one of the things they're planning to do is actually march up to Jeff Bezos' house and sort of picket there. Can you just give us an idea of what their demands are?
Well, it's a global demand, actually. So, since it's a global strike, the demands would be very nation specific. But in most cases, you have fair wages and fair working conditions in their contracts. That is something that is completely missing in most places where Amazon does not have unions or unionized workers to deal with. Outside of Europe, in most places, it really doesn't have workers being unionized or organized as part of trade unions. In most cases, the contracts are based mostly just on an individual basis, and there is no collective bargaining. That also hampers the workers' rights to actually bargain for better wages when the company is doing quite well, actually. For the past couple of years since the pandemic, it has gained billions in profits. In some places, the margin of revenue has gone up to 25%. In some places, the profits have gone by 40%. So these are not small figures, small gains, and yet workers' wages have stagnated in the same period, or pretty much has not moved forward in any case at all in real terms either. So these factors are definitely part of the strike. There is also the fact that Amazon is trying to, take all measures that is possible for it to bust unions wherever possible. Now, one of the things that we can note is the $500 bonus pay that Amazon had promised for workers to not take any kind of unauthorized leave during during this holiday season, which includes the Black Friday sales and also Christmas and New Year sales, all of which are some of the the busiest days for Amazon, but also in many cases just the worst days for Amazon workers because they are mostly overworked, they are short-staffed in many places, they have to really put out a whole host of efforts to actually set targets. Sometimes, in many cases, we have heard horror stories, and not just from like third world nations, but also from places like the United States, where we have definitely read about different kind of horror stories coming out of Amazon warehouses. So all of these factors definitely shows that this is a global problem with Amazon. It's not just limited to one place. And so that is one of the key. So these are some of the key things that the workers are trying to highlight at this point.
Yeah, Nish, you've hinted at the uneasy relationship that Amazon has with the very idea of workers unionizing. Can you just describe in detail what is going on that front?
Well, in the United States, at least, there is an active attempt to unionize workers on a large scale. That is definitely part of the larger trend in the labor market, where you're seeing unions coming up in the most unconventional of sectors as well. Not just Amazon, but fast food industry, the academia, and so on. And there are large-scale unionizing protests and strikes happening. So this is definitely part of that. But at least in the case of Amazon and other sort of not just gig economy but retail economy sectors, you have very active attempts, very deliberate attempts by corporates to break down unionizing at any point in time. We have seen what happened in Birmingham, in Alabama, where where the labor relations board actually found evidence that Amazon has done a whole host of things to scrutinize workers, to pressure them into either not voting or for their unions or not voting at all to begin with. So these factors definitely has affected its overall relations with workers. In other places, there is strong lobbying happening. And in some places like India, we have known, as you have also reported at NewsClick, there is definitely attempts to not allow workers' unions to even, deal with workers, or help workers out in some of the very non-union issues even. So these factors definitely is highlighted by the fact that Amazon does have to uh, are forced to, in fact, in many cases, in places like Germany, where there is a high union rate among warehouse workers, where they are actually forced to deal with collective bargaining. They are actually forced to shell out higher wages for their workers, better working conditions, even though in compared to other similar sectors in those countries, the conditions are definitely worse. But when you compare it with Amazon workers in other places, in comparable economies, it's not the same. And so definitely that level of, even that very basic level of demands for rights and safe working conditions is something that Amazon wants to avoid at any cost. Obviously, they did not become a $1 trillion industry and the largest private employer in the world with just this, by trying to consolidate with labor forces, labor unions. So definitely, they're trying to amp up their exploitation in this regard, and that is something that is evident in many places.
Thanks, Anish. Thanks for joining us with that. A court in Israel has extended the solitary confinement of Ahmed Manasra. Israel has held him in isolation for a year despite his deteriorating physical and mental health. Manasra was arrested in Jerusalem by the Israeli occupation when he was a 13-year-old boy. He has spent more than 7 years in different Israeli prisons. The extension of his isolation and his continued incarceration under severe conditions have invited widespread criticism. The European Union's office in Palestine said solitary confinement for more than 15 days amounts to torture. We have Abdul with us here in the studio. Let's go over and ask him what's happening in this case. So, Abdul, what is the case against Manasra? Why has he been imprisoned for so long?
Well, the case is one of those one of the examples of how Israeli system works biased towards Palestinian. In 2015, when he was 13 years old, he was arrested for basically attempted murder of two Israeli settlers in East Jerusalem. At the incident, his cousin brother was lynched by the settlers, and he was also beaten and in fact rammed by a vehicle on the scene, which basically led to his skull being broken. Later on, the Israeli court, despite the fact that it found Manasra not directly involved in the case, said that he had intentions to kill, and hence it handed over 12 years in prison for him. Later on, for various reasons, the prison term was reduced to 9.5, and he's still serving that sentence. So if you see the case, the entire logic is basically there is no ground for his incarceration, and I don't know how, and nobody knows how the court established that he had the intention of killing. Human rights groups have raised that issue time and again. But even after that, the Israeli courts have not buzzed a bit. One more important thing which should be kept in mind when we are talking about Manasra's case is at the time when he was arrested, there was no law in Israel which basically punished a person below 14 years for such crimes. During his trial, the Israeli parliament passed a law, and while the law was being debated in the Israeli parliament, the courts basically delayed his trial so that he can be punished higher. He can be sentenced for higher period in the prison.
Okay, so basically you're saying that it's a violation of his basic right to justice.
Exactly.
But also Manasra is not the only person here. Can you talk about how the Israeli system uses prison as a way to penalize people?
Exactly. See, Manasra is not the only one. There are hundreds of Palestinians who are incarcerated on different grounds, so-called administrative detention. Even those who are in regular prison, their cases are of the nature, the kind of cases we are talking about, the kinds of case Manasra's is. For example, if you see Manasra's case in more detail for what has happened in last 7 years, then you will understand how other Palestinian prisoners are treated in occupied territories and so under so-called Israeli laws. Manasra's case was arbitrarily categorized as a case of terrorism in June, which basically in anticipation that since he has already served more than 2/3 of his prison sentence, there will be appeal for his early release on the basis of his health condition. Primarily, the fact that his mental health is an issue which has been well established by independent doctors also, and they have assigned, the human rights groups claim that this mental health issue is primarily a result of the kind of circumstances a 13-year-old kid had to face, and the kind of interrogation the Israelis made Manasra subject to during the custody. So that has caused the mental health issues, and despite the fact that he served more than 2/3 of his prison term, he is not released. Instead, he has been put into solitary confinement for more than a year now, and the court has extended it for another 4 months. So I was mentioning how in June his case was categorized as a case of terrorism in anticipation that no such appeal will be entertained by the courts, and that is exactly what has happened. At least twice, the court in this district court in Israel in Beersheba has basically rejected the appeals for his early release on the basis that is a case of terrorism. So it's post facto, and in a way the Israeli prison system, Israeli law has imposed certain charges on Manasra, despite the fact that at the time when he was sentenced for 9 years, there was no charges of terrorism.
Right, Abdul. Thanks a lot for joining us with that update. Truckers in South Korea have returned to strike, demanding the government extend and expand its method of calculating the minimum wage. The so-called safe rate system for the logistics industry expires next month, but it does not cover all kinds of vehicles or freight. Workers say the government is going back on a previous assurance of an extension. A previous strike in June brought losses of over $1 billion to the economy. But these strikes could be more intense as the South Korean government reportedly considers ways to declare the industrial action illegal. We return to Anish from People's Dispatch for more on this. Anish, good to have you back. Anish, truckers striking in South Korea, can you just tell us what their demands are and what kind of impact this might have?
Well, the demands are quite straightforward in the sense that, and also the fact that these demands have been there for a while now. We actually covered the previous strike that happened about 6 months ago when the government did agree to some of the demands. but on paper, but the negotiations on that front has not moved forward. The current conservative government, which is also a part of the demands that the truckers are bringing up right now, is the fact that the government is not negotiating at all. There has been it has completely stalled the negotiations to the point that there's nothing happening on the table, and that is something that the conservative government right now of President Yoon is preventing to happen, and that is also part of the reason why the truckers are striking, because they have been pushed to a sort of desperation in this case. They're also demanding the similar demands that existed earlier, which is freight charges need to be subsidized, fuel subsidies need to be extended. There were fuel subsidies and freight subsidies that were given to truckers, especially many of them who work as contractors and not necessarily as laborers. And so it was given to them to offset the spiraling cost of fuel during the COVID-19 crisis, and also the supply chain disruptions that has been happening this year. And so in many of these cases, the current conservative government is not ready to, and because it's a fiscal conservative government, which attacks on welfare programs and subsidies of the working class, it is definitely trying to not extend any of these subsidies for next year. So truckers, considering the fact that many of these subsidies are going to expire by the end of this year, they are definitely pushed to the desperation, and that is why the strike is happening. The indefinite nature of the strike is definitely going to affect the entire global supply chain process, and that is something that everybody needs to pay attention to right now.
So, Anish, the unions have tried to sort of negotiate with the South Korean government. Can you just give us an update on where that stands right now?
Well, the unions have clearly stated that the complete process has been stalled. There is nothing happening on that front. The government is not cooperating with the unions. They are not cooperating with any of the demands. They're not even making concessions at this point. So there has been no deal that was even offered in the past 6 months since the last strike happened. So that also shows that the government is completely reluctant to actually engage with any kind of collective bargaining. In many cases, as I pointed out, they are not trying to consider them as workers even. They're trying to think of them as contractors, which is also not, which might be legally accurate, but the problem is that in, the whole relationship of things, they are workers in most cases. The effect of this kind of stalling is going to be long term. The government does not make any kind of attempts to actually negotiate it, at least negotiate with workers. Primarily because obviously we have already seen the entire cement industry has just gone to a grinding halt. 95% of their exports have just stopped. They are facing losses of over $14 million a day, and that will obviously impact the global supply chain. We are also looking at other sectors that the union is now trying to target, which includes food and groceries, and that will also have a bigger impact, which can actually affect households across South Korea at a time when the South Korean government is grappling with the cost of living crisis, grappling with an economic decline in its exports, and also a possible economic crisis in the coming months if it does not get its act together. It is definitely going to have a bigger impact that will be felt across the board.
Right, Anish. Thanks a lot for that update. And that's all we have for you today. Thank you for watching Daily Debrief. Do come back to us tomorrow. For more stories like these, visit our website, peoplesdispatch.org, and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.